The Philippines is almost never included in the Hindu-Buddhist history of Southeast Asia. Cambodia, Myanmar, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, everybody's included. But the Philippines? Almost never. But the thing is, it should be. In fact, some of the most familiar words we speak today, every day in the Philippines, like Bathala, Guro, Dukha, Diwata, and so many others, can all be traced back to Sanskrit. And that is just the beginning. Mabuhay! Earn Kapampangan, luwid kayo! Welcome back to my channel. It's me, Kirby Araullo, your friendly Filipino historian. So when you look at how Hindu-Buddhist cultures shape Southeast Asia, the results are massive. Literally massive. For example, Cambodia got Angkor Wat, the largest religious structure on earth. Indonesia got Borobudur, the largest Buddhist temple in the world. It also got the majestic Prambanan complex. Thailand and Myanmar are both littered with temples. But the Philippines, wala. No temples, no grand monuments. And if you Google Indianized kingdoms and cultures of Southeast Asia right now, look at the maps. Look at what's missing. And that absence helped create this illusion that Hindu-Buddhist influence somehow stopped right before it reached our islands. But it didn't. The evidence has been hiding in plain sight, in our languages, in gold artifacts found across the archipelago, and in a 1,000-year-old document that ties the Philippines to the wider ancient world. So the words I mentioned earlier, Diwata, Guro, Bathala, Dukha, they're not even close to the full picture. In fact, scholars have found hundreds of Sanskrit words embedded in our languages across the islands. And they don't cluster around business or trade. They cluster around God, morality, authority, knowledge, wisdom. And that alone completely changes the entire picture. Even as a little kid, I was always fascinated by how deeply connected our islands were to the wider ancient world. And the proof has been in front of us all along, in the languages we speak every day. Professor Juan R. Francisco, an Indologist at the University of the Philippines, found over 300 Sanskrit loanwords in Philippine languages. And at least 150 of those became the major terms that we still use today. Now, other studies and scholars have also found almost 300 Sanskrit loanwords in Tagalog alone. Now, for those who may not know, the Philippines is home to over 100 indigenous languages across our 7,000 islands, and almost all of them have Sanskrit loanwords. But what I find more fascinating is not where the words come from, but more on what they're actually about. Dr. Trinidad Pardo de Tavera, a Filipino scholar writing in the 1800s, noted that the Sanskrit vocabulary in Tagalog covers four things: intellectual acts, moral conceptions, emotions, and ranks of power. For example, Bathala, our word for God, traces back to the Sanskrit Batara. The word Diwata comes from Devata, celestial deities. Diwa, the spirit that lives inside all things, the essence of everything, comes from Deva. Even our word for faith, like Sampalataya in Tagalog or Salpantaya in Kapampangan, also have Sanskrit roots. And it goes deeper than the divine. For example, Buddhi, the conscience that guides us, comes from Bodhi, the Buddhist concept of enlightenment and awakening. The word Dukha, the hardship and poverty that we speak of, comes from Dukha, meaning suffering. We also have words like Maharlika, the slaves who earned their freedom and status from Mahardika. Even our titles of power, like Raja and Lakan, and words like Kuta, the word for fort, all traces back to Sanskrit. And beyond those four domains, Sanskrit also reached into everyday life. Common words like Sampagita, Mukha, Mahal, Katha, Likha, and so many others are all rooted in Sanskrit. Even Kapampangan surnames like Galura or Laksamana, they also carry traces of Hindu-Buddhist culture in them. So our ancestors were not just borrowing trade vocabulary or borrowing, random words. They were absorbing an entire worldview. And these words didn't all travel the same route. Most of them came filtered through Old Javanese and Old Malay, through the Indianized maritime world and kingdoms of Southeast Asia. But some words in Tagalog and Kapampangan, for example, preserved the original Sanskrit more faithfully than their Malay equivalents did, which means that some of it came directly. So the contact and influence was coming from multiple directions. But here's the part that matters most to me. These words didn't replace what we already had. Diwata is perhaps the clearest example. It comes from the Sanskrit Devata, meaning celestial deity. But when it arrived in the Philippines, our ancestors also used it to describe indigenous deities and indigenous spiritual beings that they had been honoring long before any Indian influence existed. So the foreign word was absorbed into the local framework, into the local cultures, not the other way around. So the language is everywhere. But the words alone could be dismissed as casual borrowing, like, from trade. So if this influence was real, if Hindu-Buddhist culture really existed in the Philippines, then there should be physical evidence, right? Now, in 1922, a gold figure from the Philippines was sent to Chicago to the Field Museum. Approximately 1.8 kilograms of solid gold, at least 18 karat gold, pure gold. And it depicts a Hindu-Buddhist deity seated in a lotus position. Now this is one of the most important artifacts ever found in our islands. And yet, it is not in the Philippines. It's in Chicago. In 1917, after a storm and a flood along the Wawa River in Esperanza, Agusan del Sur, an indigenous Manobo woman found a figure buried in the riverbank. It was solid gold, seated in a full lotus position, wearing a crown, jewelry, a chain crossing the chest. It was about 7 inches tall, approximately 1.8 kilograms of gold, at least 18 and up to 21 karat gold. So that's heavier than most laptops today. It was made of solid gold, found in the riverbank in Mindanao, along the marshes of Agusan. But the Philippine government couldn't purchase this golden statue, claiming that they didn't have enough funds. Then in 1922, it was acquired by the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago for 4,000 pesos, and it's been there ever since. Now, scholars have debated her identity for over a century. A Hindu deity, a Buddhist Tara, and most recently, an offering goddess from the Vajrayana tradition, a branch of Tantric Buddhism, stylistically connected to the bronzes found in Nganjuk in Java, in what is now Indonesia. To this day, scholars disagree on who exactly she is, but they agree on something more important. In 1920, Dutch art historian F.D.K. Bosch concluded that this figure was made by local craftsmen in Mindanao, possibly copying a Javanese model. So the artist copied the form, but it overlooked specific hand gestures that would identify the deity precisely. So in short, it was made in our islands. So the knowledge of how to produce Hindu-Buddhist religious figures in gold existed among the artisans in what is now the Philippines. Now 10 years ago, I actually made a video about the Golden Tara. So if you think it is time for a proper, updated deep dive, let me know in the comments below. And this golden image was not alone. In fact, a golden kinari, a half-bird, half-female celestial being from the Hindu-Buddhist mythology, was also found in Surigao. So, this was not just a random, isolated find. But the question is, was it all just in Mindanao? Was the Hindu-Buddhist culture limited to the islands of Mindanao? The golden kinari found in Surigao has almond-shaped eyes, high cheekbones, a low-bridged nose, and thick lips. Not the rounded, squared features of Javanese sculptures in Indonesia, not the swan-like Thai depictions of the kinari. So every culture that adopted this figure made the kinari look like their own people. These artisans, our ancestors, took a foreign mythological figure and gave her their own face, our own face. Now in the Tabon Caves of Palawan, archaeologists found a gold Garuda pendant that was actually identical to the ones found in Vietnam. They also found a bronze Ganesha, both in the Tabon Caves of Palawan and in Cebu. These are not neighboring islands. Hindu figures were found scattered across the entire archipelago. In Calatagan, Batangas, archaeologists found a clay medallion depicting the Buddha Amitabha seated in a classic Buddhist pose. It was not imported but made locally in Luzon. And back in Mindanao in Butuan, they found an ivory seal carved from the tusk of a Sumatran rhinoceros, inscribed with the word Butuan in Kavi script, the writing system of Hindu-Buddhist Java. It is the kind of seal that you stamp on official documents. So Butuan had one. And just think about it. This small seal alone connects the islands of the Philippines to the wider world, from Sumatra to Java to Mindanao. This seal is now housed in the National Museum of the Philippines and declared a national cultural treasure. And these are just a few examples. Butuan, Agusan, Palawan, Batangas, from Mindanao to the Visayas, all the way to Luzon. Hindu-Buddhist iconography were produced locally across the archipelago. Now, these communities, our ancestors, were not just, passively receiving foreign culture. They're engaging with it. They're adapting it. They're making it their own, making it our own. But how did all of this get to the islands we now call the Philippines, thousands of miles away from India? Now, the answer is two maritime empires that most Filipinos today were never thought about. The Srivijaya Empire, based in Sumatra, dominated maritime Southeast Asia from the 7th to the 13th century. The Majapahit Empire, based in Java, rose after it and lasted into the 16th century or the 1500s. Both of them were Hindu-Buddhist. Both of them spread their culture through trade. And the islands we now call the Philippines was part of this world. Our ancestors were not on the edges of it. They were part of it. F. Landa Hocano, one of the most important Filipino anthropologists, put it this way: what arrived in our islands was already filtered through Java and Sumatra. He said that what penetrated into our country was already the modified version of the original Hindu cultural traits. Now, Butuan was a keynote. Records from the Chinese Song dynasty documented Butuan as a kingdom with Hindu-Buddhist characteristics. In fact, in 1001 CE, Butuan sent its first recorded tribute mission to the Chinese imperial court. So again, Butuan was not a random village on the edge of the world. It was a thriving kingdom conducting diplomacy with the most powerful empire in the world. Now, in 1225, a Chinese Song dynasty official described a kingdom called Mai and noted that metal images of Buddhas scattered in the landscape. Now, scholars today still debate where exactly Mai was. Most place it in Mindoro, while some point to Bai in Laguna or elsewhere in central Luzon. Either way, a Chinese source, completely independent of everything we've looked at, was documenting Buddhist artifacts in the archipelago. These are the kinds of forgotten chapters of our history that I'm writing about in my next book, Forgotten Kingdoms of the Sea. So if you want to support it and be the first to know when it launches, check out the links below. The languages confirm it. The artifacts confirm it. The Chinese records confirm it independently. But is there something that, one thing that ties all of this together? Around 1987, near Laguna de Bay, someone found a copper plate covered in writing nobody could read until 1991, when Dutch scholar Anton Posma deciphered it. And I've actually made several videos about this copper plate, including a deep dive in 2025. But here's a short version. The Laguna Copperplate Inscription, or LCI, is written in Kavi, the writing system of Hindu-Buddhist Java. It uses Old Malay mixed with Sanskrit, Old Javanese, and traces of Old Kapampangan and Old Tagalog. The LCI is dated using the Saka calendar, a lunisolar system used across India, Java, Cambodia, the Philippines, and beyond. It reads Saka year 822, month of Vaisakha, 4th day of the waning moon. Historian Hector Santos converted that date to the Julian calendar, Monday, April 21, 900 CE. Now, building on that, I calculated the equivalent to the calendar we use today, the Gregorian calendar, and that is Monday, April 26, 900 CE. So just think about it. That is exactly 1,126 years ago, this April 2026. The inscription recorded a legal transaction, the forgiveness of a debt of over 900 grams of gold, nearly a kilogram of gold for a single debt pardon. And in a single document, it references Tondo in Luzon, Devata aka Butuan in Mindanao, and Medang in Java in what is now Indonesia. So Luzon, Mindanao, and Java all in one legal document in the year 900. And this was not a stray artifact washed ashore, but a functioning legal document operating within a wider Hindu-Buddhist framework, a wider Hindu-Buddhist network. Undeniable proof that what is now the Philippines was fully embedded in the Hindu-Buddhist world of maritime Southeast Asia. Now, I've been studying this document for over 20 years. I've been teaching about it for over a decade. I've taught it in colleges, in high schools, in elementary schools. But honestly, to this day, I still find it mind-blowing. Now, here's what most people miss. The Hindu-Buddhist influence did not replace what was already in our islands. Bathala did not erase indigenous understandings of divinity. The Hindu-Buddhist figures did not replace the Anito. They existed alongside them. And that is what our ancestors have always done. Whenever a new religion arrives, they absorbed them, adapted them, and made them their own. But here's a question that I always get over the years. Kuya Kirby, where are the temples? Cambodia has Angkor Wat, Indonesia has Borobudur. There's nothing like that in the Philippines. But the thing is, the absence of temples does not mean the absence of influence. And I'm actually making a whole video diving deep into this question about the temples in the Philippines. So stay tuned. Hindu-Buddhist culture is still alive in the Philippines. Every time we say Bathala, Dukha, Guro, Diwata, we're speaking a vocabulary that traces all the way back to India. For at least 1,000 years, for centuries, Hindu-Buddhism shaped how our people in these islands understood divinity, authority, power, knowledge, wisdom, and even suffering. And there's so much more that we haven't even talked about. But Hindu-Buddhism was not the last major world religion to arrive in our islands and influence our culture. The next one also came by sea, through trade and marriage. And by the time the Spaniards, the conquistadors, arrived, it was already deeply rooted across Mindanao and as far north as Manila and Pampanga. So if you want to learn more, if you want to know what happened next, the story of how Islam reached the Philippines, and how Catholicism was imposed on our people, both of those stories are right here. You can watch those videos right now. Maraming salamat po or hindi mapangan, dakal pong salamat kay Hongan, iniloko agyaman naklaunay. See you next time mga Tagalog kita kits and in Kapampangan, Mikitix and in Binisaya, kita aita.